He had millions in offshore accounts and blood on his hands. So why did the city's most feared syndicate boss pickpocket a struggling waitress? The answer lay inside her cheap faux leather wallet, a single, crumpled piece of paper that shattered his empire and rewrote his entire dark past. The rain in Chicago never just fell, it assaulted the pavement. James Costello sat in the corner booth of Starlight Diner, a neon-lit relic tucked into the gritty underbelly of the South Side. At 32, James was the undisputed head of the Costello Syndicate, a man who traded in fear, silence, and millions of dollars in untraceable logistics. He was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit that cost more than the diner's annual revenue, his presence entirely out of place amidst the cracked vinyl booths and the smell of stale coffee. Across from him sat Thomas J. Abernathy, a highly influential city controller whose gambling debts had finally caught up to him. Abernathy was sweating through his collar, pleading for more time. But James wasn't listening to the politician's pathetic bargaining. His cold, calculating eyes were fixed on the waitress wiping down the counter. Her name tag, slightly crooked, read Katie. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that James recognized from his own days starving on the streets before his father pulled him into the family business. Katie had stray strands of auburn hair falling across her face, and her hands moved with a frantic, nervous energy. As Abernathy continued to stammer about asset liquidations, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. 3 men walked in. James instantly recognized the heavy, swaggering gait of Victor Santoro's enforcers. Santoro was a rival underboss, a ruthless operator who had been encroaching on James's territory for months. James, his right-hand man, standing quietly by the jukebox, slipped a hand inside his jacket. The air in the diner evaporated into a suffocating tension. The enforcers weren't looking at James. They were heading straight for the counter. They cornered Katie. Rent was due on the 1st, Katie. The lead thug, a heavy-set man named Briggs, sneered, leaning over the Formica counter. Santoro doesn't like waiting for his investments to mature. Katie took a step back, her back hitting the coffee machines. I told you I get paid on Friday. I have the cash. Just give me 3 days. 3 days is a luxury you can't afford, Briggs growled, reaching out to grab her wrist. James didn't know why he moved. Usually, the cardinal rule of his existence was to never intervene in petty squabbles that didn't affect his bottom line. But something about the quiet desperation in her eyes triggered a ghost of a memory he had buried decades ago. Before Briggs could tighten his grip, James was there. He moved with terrifying silence, his hand clamping down on Briggs' thick forearm like a steel vice. The lady said Friday, James said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that barely carried over the diner's humming refrigerator. Briggs spun around, ready to throw a punch, but stopped dead when he looked into James's eyes. The blood drained from the enforcer's face as he recognized the impeccably dressed phantom of the Chicago underworld. Mr. Costello, Briggs stammered, instantly releasing Katie. We were just collecting a neighborhood debt. Nothing to concern you. It concerns me when it ruins my coffee, James replied smoothly, releasing Briggs with a shove that sent the larger man stumbling backward. Walk out that door and tell Santoro that if he wants to play collection agent, he should stay out of my zip code. The 3 men scrambled out into the rain without a backward glance. Katie stood there, her chest heaving, staring at James with a mixture of profound relief and lingering terror. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. You didn't have to do that. I don't like bullies, James lied smoothly. He turned to walk back to his booth, but as he brushed past her in the narrow aisle, the instincts he had honed as a street thief flared to life. He suspected Santoro wasn't just shaking down random waitresses. There was always an angle. Was she an informant? A mule? With a sleight of hand so flawless it felt like second nature, James's fingers grazed her apron pocket. In a fraction of a second, he lifted her cheap faux leather wallet and slipped it seamlessly into his own jacket. 10 minutes later, the diner meeting concluded with Abernathy signing away the deeds to 3 commercial warehouses. James stepped out into the rainy night, climbed into the back of his waiting armored SUV, and signaled his driver to head to the Gold Coast. As the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, James pulled Katie's wallet from his pocket. It was frayed at the edges, overstuffed with grocery receipts and punch cards. He flipped it open. Her driver's license confirmed her identity, Katie Josephine Harding. He bypassed a meager $20 in cash and pulled out a folded piece of paper tucked deep inside the billfold. It felt thick, almost like cardstock. James unfolded it, expecting to find a list of drop points or a pawn ticket. Instead, he found a photograph. It was deeply creased and faded, a Polaroid taken over 20 years ago. The air vanished from James's lungs as he stared at the image. It showed a 10-year-old boy with a fresh, jagged scar across his left cheek. The boy was handing a meticulously hand-carved wooden sparrow to a little girl with bright, hopeful eyes. James's hand instinctively went to the left side of his face, his fingers tracing the faint, silvery line of the scar he still bore. He was the boy in the photo, and the little girl the girl he had known only as Little Bird at St. Jude's orphanage before his father found him and pulled him out of the system was Katie. But it wasn't just the photo that made the world tilt on its axis. Tucked behind the Polaroid was a yellowed piece of paper. It was a check written out to Sarah Harding, Katie's mother. James's eyes locked onto the signature at the bottom. It belonged to his father, Richard Costello. The amount was for a staggering $250,000. But it was the date stamped on the check that sent a shockwave of ice through James's veins. October 14th, 2004. James's father had been brutally murdered in a car bombing on October 11th, 2004. James had built his entire criminal empire, spilled oceans of blood, and waged a 10-year war to avenge a death that supposedly happened 3 days before this check was written. How could a dead man sign a $250,000 check? Sleep did not come to James Costello that night. He spent the early hours of the morning pacing the hardwood floors of his penthouse, overlooking Lake Michigan, the yellowed check and the faded Polaroid resting on the granite kitchen island like active explosives. If his father survived the bombing, where did he go? Why did he abandon James to the wolves of the syndicate? And more importantly, what was Katie's mother's connection to a man the entire criminal underworld believed to be Ash? By dawn, James had mobilized his private intelligence network. Within 6 hours, a thick manila folder rested on his desk. Katie Josephine Harding, 28 years old, registered nurse at Chicago General Hospital, currently suspended due to an accusation of medication theft charge, vehemently denied by her union rep. Now working double shifts at Starlight Diner to pay off a $50,000 medical debt incurred by her late mother, Sarah Harding, who died of leukemia 6 months ago. There were no ties to Santoro's criminal operations, just a desperate woman drowning in a rigged cistern. James knew he couldn't just walk up to her and demand answers. If she knew the truth about the check, she might run. Or worse, if Santoro's men were watching her closely, James's direct involvement would paint a massive target on her back. He had to be careful. He had to become a ghost in her life. That evening the rain had cleared, leaving the city slick and shining. Katie finished her shift at the diner at 11 p.m. She stepped out the back door into the alley, wrapping a thin cardigan around her shoulders against the biting wind. James watched from the shadows of his parked car as she frantically patted her apron pockets, panic washing over her face as she realized her wallet was gone. She slumped against the brick wall, burying her face in her hands. James took a steadying breath, stepped out of the vehicle, and walked toward her. His footsteps echoed in the damp alley. Katie's head snapped up. She tensed, pressing herself against the door, until she recognized him beneath the amber glow of the street lamp. "You," she breathed, her posture relaxing a fraction. "The man from last night. You dropped this?" James asked, his voice softer than he intended. He held out the frayed wallet. Katie gasped, lunging forward to snatch it from his hand. She immediately unzipped the main compartment, ignoring the cash, and blindly dug her fingers into the back slot. Her shoulder sagged with profound relief as she felt the folded Polaroid and the check which James had carefully replaced after photographing them. "I thought I lost it," she whispered, clutching the wallet to her chest. "Thank you. I don't even know your name, James," he said smoothly. "James Pendleton. I'm Katie. Katie Harding." She looked up at him, her eyes tracing the sharp lines of his face. She lingered for a microsecond on the faint scar on his cheek, but there was no flash of recognition. To her, he was just a stranger in an expensive suit. "You're making a habit of saving me, James Pendleton." "I was walking by, saw it near the storm drain," he lied effortlessly. "Looked like you were having a rough night." "That's the understatement of the century," she muttered, offering a tired, self-deprecating smile. "Between losing my nursing job, the loan sharks, and now nearly losing the only thing I have left of my mother, I think the universe is telling me to pack it in." "I found the universe rarely knows what it's talking about," James replied. He gestured toward the street. "My car is parked out front. Let me give you a ride home. The South Side isn't forgiving after midnight." Katie hesitated. A woman in her position shouldn't get into a car with a strange man, no matter how impeccably dressed. But she was exhausted, freezing, and he had already intervened to save her once. She nodded. The ride was quiet. James drove a sleek, black sedan, deliberately choosing an unmarked vehicle from his fleet to maintain the James Pendleton illusion. He played the role of a successful corporate logistics consultant perfectly. He asked mild, probing questions, letting Katie fill the silence. She talked about her mother, Sarah. "She was a private duty nurse," Katie said, staring out the window at the passing city lights. "Worked night shifts for high-end clients. But she was terrified of everything. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. She always acted like someone was right behind us." "Did she ever say who she was running from?" James asked, his grip tightening on the leather steering wheel. "No, but right before she died, she gave me that check." Katie pulled the yellowed paper from her wallet and traced the signature. $250,000. "She told me never to cash it unless my life depended on it. She said it was blood money. From a ghost." James's heart slammed against his ribs. "A ghost. I tried to cash it last week to pay Santoro's men," Katie continued, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "The bank laughed at me. The account was closed 20 years ago. The man who signed it, Richard Costello, is dead. He was some big mob boss who got blown up." She turned to James, completely oblivious to the man she was sitting next to. "Can you imagine? My mother, sweet, quiet Sarah, dealing with the Mafia." James parked the car in front of Katie's dilapidated apartment building. He put the vehicle in park, turning to face her. The dim interior lights caught the amber flecks in his dark eyes. "Katie," James said slowly, weighing every word, "I have resources in the financial sector. Old accounts sometimes get transferred to holding companies. Let me look into that check for you." She frowned, clutching her purse. "Why would you do that for me? We just met." "Because Santoro's men won't stop coming," James said, the truth bleeding through the facade. "And because I owe a debt to a little bird from a long time ago." Katie froze. The air in the car seemed to solidify. Her eyes darted from his dark, intense gaze to the faint scar on his cheek. Her breath hitched. "James?" She whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "James, from St. Temple." "Jude's." Before James could answer, a blinding light cut through the darkness of the street. Two black SUVs skidded around the corner, boxing James's sedan in against the curb. The doors flew open and 6 men piled out, assault rifles raised. They weren't Santoro's street-level thugs. These were professional hitters. James reacted with lethal precision. He shoved Katie's head down beneath the dashboard, just as the first volley of bullets shattered the rear windshield, raining glass over the leather seats. "Stay down," James roared. Drawing the heavy silenced Block 19 he kept holstered under his suit jacket. The illusion of James Pendleton, the mild-mannered consultant, shattered instantly. The Mafia boss had re-entered the chat, and the secrets of the past were about to be written in blood. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the quiet of the street. James didn't hesitate. Keeping Katie pinned beneath the dashboard with one hand, he threw the sedan into reverse with the other. The engine screamed as he slammed the accelerator, the car blindly rocketing backward down the slick pavement. Bullets sparked off the reinforced hood and embedded themselves in the bulletproof paneling of the doors. "Keep your head down," James roared over the sound of grinding metal. He spun the steering wheel violently, executing a flawless J-turn that sent the sedan skidding 180 degrees. He slammed it into drive, the tires biting into the wet asphalt as they tore away from the ambush, plunging into the subterranean labyrinth of Lower Wacker Drive. The hitters' SUVs scrambled to pursue, but James's intimate knowledge of Chicago's underground grid allowed him to lose them within 3 miles, weaving through service tunnels and abandoned loading docks. Beside him, Katie was trembling uncontrollably, her hands clamped over her ears. "You're safe, they're gone," James said, his voice dropping back to that calm, gravelly baritone. He drove them to a secure, unlisted penthouse suite atop the Drake Hotel, one of the many properties held by his legitimate shell companies. Once inside the opulent, dimly lit suite, James locked the heavy mahogany doors and turned to Katie. She was staring at him, her chest heaving, the terror of the shootout battling with the shock of her revelation. "James," she said, her voice cracking, "the boy with the wooden bird. You're James Costello. You run the syndicate." "I am," James confessed, pouring a double scotch and setting it on the glass coffee table in front of her. He didn't try to soften the truth, and right now someone is trying to kill us because of what you have in your pocket. Katie pulled the frayed wallet out, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She extracted the yellowed check. "Because of this?" "Why?" James sat opposite her, leaning his elbows on his knees. "My father, Richard Costello, was assassinated in a car bombing on October 11th, 2004. I buried a closed casket, but this check was signed 3 days later. For 20 years I thought my father's enemies killed him. But this piece of paper means either he faked his death or someone else was pulling the strings." Katie stared at the check, then looked up at James, her nurse's instincts kicking in as she noticed blood soaking through the sleeve of his custom suit. A stray piece of shrapnel had grazed his shoulder. "You're bleeding," she murmured. Without waiting for permission, she moved to the adjoining bathroom, returning seconds later with a first aid kit. As she efficiently cut away the ruined fabric and began cleaning the wound, the proximity between them felt electric, heavily laden with 20 years of unspoken history. "My mother," Katie began softly, taping a gauze pad over his shoulder. She was a private trauma nurse. She worked off the books for wealthy clients at a private clinic near Lake Forest. She told me once that she saw something she shouldn't have, that she was given a choice: take the money and disappear or die. James's mind raced. He pulled his encrypted phone from his pocket and forwarded the high-resolution scan of the check to his top forensic accountant. Trace the routing number on this holding account. I need to know exactly who authorized the funds. 10 minutes later, the phone buzzed. James read the message and the blood drained from his face. The room suddenly felt completely devoid of oxygen. "It wasn't my father," James whispered, his voice laced with a lethal, icy realization. "What?" Katie asked, stepping back. "The signature. It's a flawless forgery, but the holding account. It traces back to a dummy corporation called Vanguard Logistics." James looked up, his dark eyes burning with a terrifying rage. Vanguard is owned by Declan Fitzpatrick. Declan, the man who had taken James under his wing after Richard's death. The man who had taught James how to shoot, how to lead, how to become a monster. Declan was his most trusted underboss, the uncle he never had. The pieces violently snapped into place. Richard Costello hadn't died in the car bombing. He had been severely injured and secretly transported to the Lake Forest Clinic to recover. Declan, seizing the opportunity to take over the empire, had gone to the clinic to finish the job. Katie's mother, Sarah, had been the nurse on duty. She had witnessed Declan murder the head of the Costello family. Declan had written the check from a dead man's account to buy Sarah's silence, effectively framing a ghost. And tonight, when James's intelligence network started asking questions about Sarah Harding and an old bank account, Declan realized his 20-year secret was about to be unearthed. He sent the hitters to wipe out both James and Katie. "He killed my father," James stated, the words heavy as lead. "And he destroyed your mother's life to cover it up." Oak. Katie's eyes filled with tears, the weight of her mother's lifetime of paranoia finally making sense. "What do we do now?" James stood up, rolling his uninjured shoulder, the phantom of the boy from the orphanage replaced entirely by the ruthless syndicate boss. "We rewrite the ledger. The abandoned shipyard on the south side was a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and broken cranes. The rain had returned, a torrential downpour that turned the ground into a black mirror. James stood alone under the glow of a single flickering halogen light. He had sent a secure message to Declan, stating he had survived an assassination attempt by Santoro's men and needed immediate extraction. He knew Declan wouldn't send hitters this time. He would come himself to ensure the job was done right, playing the role of the loyal savior until the very last second. Headlights cut through the rain. A black armored SUV pulled up and Declan Fitzpatrick stepped out. He was a silver-haired man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed, carrying an umbrella. Two heavily armed guards flanked him. "James, thank God," Declan called out, rushing forward with a look of feigned relief. "When I heard the radio chatter, I thought we'd lost you. Where's the girl?" James didn't move. He kept his hands casually in his coat pockets. "She's safe." "Funny thing, Declan. I didn't mention a girl in my message." Declan stopped walking. The rain hammered against his umbrella. The two guards subtly shifted their grips on their rifles. The air grew thick with lethal intent. "Santoro's men have been tracking her," Declan smoothly recovered. "I assumed she was with you. Santoro didn't send those hitters, Declan," James said, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel of the warehouses. Slowly, James pulled the yellowed check from his pocket and held it up in the rain. "I found this, issued from my father's private account, dated October 14th. Declan's eyes locked onto the piece of paper. His charming facade melted away, replaced by a cold reptilian stare. "Sarah Harding," James continued, taking a slow step forward. "She was a good nurse, Declan. Just a single mother trying to feed her kid. You smothered my father in his hospital bed while she watched, and then you bought her soul with this paper. You made me wage a 10-year war against rival families for a murder you committed. Declan sighed, a sound of genuine exhaustion. He lowered the umbrella, letting the rain soak his expensive coat. Your father was weak, James. He wanted to go legitimate. He wanted to give it all up and leave us defenseless. I did what had to be done to protect the family, to protect you. And look what you've built. You're a king. I'm a weapon you pointed at your enemies, James corrected, his voice dangerously low. And now the weapon is pointing at me, Declan sneered. He nodded to his guards. Put him down. Make it look like Santoro's work. The guards raised their rifles, but before they could pull the triggers, a blinding spotlight snapped on from the top of a nearby crane, illuminating the entire shipyard. The red laser sights of a dozen sniper rifles painted Declan's chest and the foreheads of his guards. James's loyalists, men who answered only to the true heir of the Costello family, stepped out from the shadows of the shipping containers, heavily armed and closing the perimeter. James had spent the last 2 hours exposing Declan's betrayal to the inner circle, providing undeniable financial proof of his treachery. In the Mafia, loyalty is paramount, but killing a boss is the ultimate sin. Declan looked around, realizing he was completely surrounded. The color drained from his face and his umbrella slipped from his hands, clattering onto the wet asphalt. You think you can run this city without me? Declan spat, panic finally edging into his voice. I don't intend to run it at all, James replied. He pulled his Block 19 from his holster. I'm retiring. 2 shots rang out in the rain. The next morning, the Chicago sun broke through the clouds, painting the city skyline in brilliant gold. Cathy stood in the lobby of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, holding a manila envelope. Inside was a cashier's check that had mysteriously arrived at the hospital's billing department, completely clearing her mother's $50,000 debt. Alongside it was a formal letter of reinstatement from the hospital board, apologizing for the administrative error regarding her suspension. She walked out through the revolving glass doors and stopped. Parked at the curb was a sleek black sedan. Leaning against the hood was James. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a tailored, intimidating charcoal suit. Instead, he wore a simple leather jacket and jeans. The heavy, dark burden that had haunted his eyes the night before was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady peace. Katie walked down the steps, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stopped in front of him. I saw the news, Katie said softly. A major reorganization in the Costello syndicate. They say the boss stepped down, disappeared completely. He did, James smiled, a genuine warm expression that made the scar on his cheek crinkle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, meticulously hand-carved wooden sparrow. He held it out to her. I hear a life in legitimate logistics is much better for the soul. Plus, I have a promise to keep to a little bird. Katie's breath hitched. She reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took the wooden bird. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of overwhelming relief. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and wrapped her arms around his neck. James held her tight, burying his face in her auburn hair. The pickpocket had stolen her wallet, but in the end it was Katie who had stolen the mob boss's heart, saving them both from the ghosts of their past. What a journey! From a desperate shakedown in a diner to uncovering a 20-year-old Mafia conspiracy, James and Katie's story proves that the past never truly stays buried. Sometimes the darkest secrets lead us right back to the light. If you love this intense, twist-filled romance and want more gripping real-life drama stories, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Catch you in the next one.